the mother who refused to stay silent before a jury could decide Lil Durk's fate. One grieving mother walked into federal court, determined to make sure the judge understood exactly what this case had already cost. She did not send a statement from hundreds of miles away. She did not allow attorneys to be the only voices speaking for her family. Andrea Robinson traveled from Savannah, Georgia, to Los Angeles and entered a courtroom filled with lawyers, supporters, reporters, and arguments over whether Durk should be allowed to return home while awaiting trial. But Andrea was carrying something no multi-million-dollar bond package could erase: the memory of her only son, Xavier Robinson. To millions following the case online, this was another explosive chapter involving Lil Durk, OTF, Quando Rondo, King Von, and federal prosecutors. To Andrea, it was never entertainment. It was the aftermath of the night her son never came home. Federal prosecutors alleged that Durk, whose legal name is Durk Devontae Banks, was connected to a murder-for-hire plot targeting Quando Rondo in Los Angeles in August 2022. Durk has faced the accusations through the legal process, and allegations are not convictions. But one fact sits at the emotional center of everything that followed: Quando survived the shooting, while Xavier Robinson lost his life. And Xavier, according to the story his mother has fought to keep alive, was never supposed to become just another name attached to a famous rap conflict. That is what made Andrea's appearance in court so powerful. While attorneys debated release conditions, money, monitoring, security, and risk, she brought the conversation back to the human cost. Through emotion, she told the court about losing her son and expressed fear for her own safety. Suddenly, the hearing was no longer simply about whether a famous rapper could secure his freedom before trial. There was a mother standing in the same room, asking the justice system not to forget the person who could never walk through his front door again. And that courtroom appearance was only one part of Andrea's fight. She had already pursued a wrongful death lawsuit, spoken publicly about Xavier, and repeatedly pushed back against an internet culture that could reduce real loss to another scoreboard in a rap rivalry. The deeper you follow her story, the harder it becomes to view this case as just another headline. Because to understand why Andrea traveled across the country to speak, we have to go back to the night Xavier was standing beside his cousin in Los Angeles, and understand how a conflict he allegedly was never at the center of changed his family forever. Before we go there, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city or state in the comments. If you believe victims and their families should remain at the center of stories like this, come on, huh? If you think the public should wait for the full trial before forming conclusions, come on, dude, and subscribe. Because the next chapter reveals how Xavier became caught in a story that was never supposed to be his. The man who was never supposed to be the target. Long before Xavier Robinson became a name inside a federal murder-for-hire case, he was simply a young man from Savannah, Georgia, living a life far removed from the celebrity machinery surrounding Chicago rap. He was not a major artist. He was not signed to OTF. And according to the story presented around the case, he was not a central participant in the years of tension that fans had been following online. His connection was painfully simple. Xavier was Quando Rondo's cousin. That connection became devastating on August 19, 2022. Federal prosecutors alleged that a group connected to OTF traveled from Chicago to Los Angeles as part of a planned operation targeting Quando Rondo. According to the indictment, individuals involved allegedly used flights and rental vehicles, followed Quando's movements, and eventually confronted his group near a Los Angeles area gas station. The government's case alleges that the operation was retaliation connected to the death of King Von nearly 2 years earlier. But when that night ended, the person prosecutors say was being targeted was still alive. Quando Rondo survived. Xavier Robinson did not. That distinction would become one of the most painful elements of the entire case. Xavier was standing with his cousin when the attack happened, but prosecutors have framed Quando as the intended target for Andrea Robinson. None of the language surrounding rap rivalries could explain why her only child was suddenly gone. The internet quickly had its own vocabulary for what happened. People connected it to King Von, Quando Rondo, Lil Durk and years of public tension. Timelines appeared. Old clips resurfaced. Lyrics were dissected. Fans argued over responsibility as though they were analyzing another chapter in an ongoing hip-hop saga. Andrea was living a completely different reality. She was not studying diss records. She was not keeping score between competing camps. She was a mother receiving the kind of news that divides a life into two permanent pieces, everything before the phone call and everything after it. That difference matters because it becomes the emotional foundation of everything. Andrea would later do. Every statement, every court appearance, and every legal action would carry the same message. Savior was not a plot device in somebody else's rap story. He was her son. And to understand why federal prosecutors believe he became caught in this tragedy, the timeline has to move backward almost 2 years to another loss that shook the rap world. The shadow of King Von. The road to the federal allegations against Lil Durk does not begin in Los Angeles. Prosecutors traced their theory back to Atlanta in November 2020, when King Von, born Davon Bennett, died following an altercation involving people associated with Quando Rondo's circle. Von's death sent shockwaves through hip-hop. But for Lil Durk, the loss was deeply personal, as well as professional. Von was closely associated with Durk and OTF, and their bond had become visible through music, performances, and years of public history. In the period that followed, grief over Von repeatedly surfaced around Durk's music and public story. Then prosecutors made a far more serious allegation. According to the federal government's theory, that grief eventually became part of the motive behind an alleged retaliation plot targeting Quando Rondo. Prosecutors alleged that people associated with OTF traveled to California and tracked Quando before the August 2022 shooting. They further alleged that Durk played a role in financing or organizing the operation. Those are allegations, not a verdict. Durk is entitled to challenge the government's evidence, and the ultimate question of criminal responsibility belongs to the legal process. That distinction is essential because online discussion can turn an indictment into a conviction long before a jury hears the evidence. But the prosecution's timeline creates the central chain behind this case. King von dies in 2020, nearly 2 years later. Prosecutors say an alleged retaliation operation targets Quando Rondo. Quando survives. Xavier Robinson D. And that is where two completely different stories collide. One is the story the rap world followed: loyalty, grief, rivalry, and the consequences of conflicts that continued far beyond a single night. The other is Andrea Robinson's story. Her son was gone. Even though prosecutors say he was not the intended target, that collision is precisely why Savior's name mattered. Without it, the case can easily become another conversation about famous rappers, lyrics, affiliations, and street mythology. With it, the consequences become impossible to romanticize. For almost 2 years after Savior's death, Andrea had no federal arrest to point toward and no trial approaching. Then, in October 2024, everything changed. Lil Durk was taken into federal custody, and suddenly, a tragedy. Andrea had been living privately exploded across the entire hip-hop internet. The arrest that changed the story. When Lil Durk was arrested in Florida in October 2024, the reaction was immediate. His name dominated hip-hop conversation. Fans searched the charges. Commentators reconstructed old timelines. Social media filled with theories about OTF, Quando Rondo, King Von, and what the case might mean for one of Chicago rap's biggest stars. For millions of people, the arrest was breaking news. For Andrea Robinson, it was something far more personal. Federal prosecutors were now publicly laying out allegations connected to the night her son died. What had existed for years as grief, questions, and investigation was becoming a formal criminal case. But Andrea also saw another problem developing almost immediately. Celebrity threatened to consume the victim. The bigger Lil Durk's name became in the coverage, the easier it was for Savior Robinson to become a footnote. Andrea refused to accept that. She began using public attention to redirect the conversation toward her son. While strangers debated Durk's career, his music, and whether prosecutors could prove their allegations, Andrea emphasized the person whose life had actually ended that night. She wanted people to remember Xavier as more than Quando Rondo's cousin or the victim listed in court documents. The contrast was brutal. Online, people could close an app and move on to the next trending story. Andrea could not scroll away from what happened. That disconnect became one of the strongest themes surrounding her public response. Rap fans naturally focused on the celebrity defendant because celebrity drives attention. Andrea kept forcing the story back toward its human cost, and she was not limiting that fight to social media. By early 2025, she moved into another arena entirely. Andrea pursued a wrongful death lawsuit, naming Durk and other defendants identified in the action. The criminal prosecution belonged to the government. This new legal battle belonged to Xavier's family. It meant Andrea was now pursuing accountability on two separate tracks surrounding the same loss. And soon, those legal paths would lead her toward an even more dramatic moment. Durk's attorneys were preparing an extensive proposal, seeking his release while the criminal case continued. Andrea decided she would not watch that hearing from Georgia. She was going to Los Angeles herself, a second fight for accountability. In February 2025, Andrea Robinson took a step that showed just how far she was prepared to go. She filed a wrongful death lawsuit connected to Xavier's killing, naming Lil Durk and additional defendants described in the action. This was separate from the federal criminal prosecution. That distinction matters. In the criminal case, federal prosecutors must prove the charges under the demanding standard required in criminal court. A wrongful death action follows a different civil process and allows a family to seek legal accountability and damages under a separate standard. One case does not automatically decide the other. Andrea was pursuing both paths. Behind the technical legal language was something much simpler. She refused to allow her son's death to exist, only as evidence in somebody else's criminal prosecution. The lawsuit expanded the accountability question beyond a single individual. According to the claims described in the source material, Andrea's legal team sought to hold multiple people or entities responsible for their alleged roles surrounding what happened to Xavier. Whether those claims succeed is for the civil process to determine, just as the criminal allegations must be tested separately. But Andrea's strategy was becoming unmistakable. When public attention moved online, she spoke publicly. When civil court offered another avenue, she filed suit. And when federal court prepared to consider whether Lil Durk could be released before trial, she decided to physically show up. That hearing carried enormous stakes. Durk's defense had assembled a multi-million-dollar release proposal involving strict conditions intended to convince the court that he could safely await trial outside federal custody. To supporters, the proposal represented a path home. While Durk maintained his right to defend himself against allegations that had not yet produced a conviction. To Andrea, the hearing represented something else. She had told the world that the consequences of August 2022 did not disappear when the headlines faded. Now a judge was going to decide whether the man prosecutors accused of involvement in the alleged plot could leave custody. Andrea boarded a plane from Georgia to California. She was not traveling there simply to watch. She intended to speak. The $4, 5 millions question. By the time Lil Durk's bond hearing arrived, his defense had constructed an extraordinary proposal. According to the source material, the package was valued at approximately $4, 5 million and included restrictive conditions such as home detention, electronic monitoring, and private security. The defense argument was straightforward. Strict controls could address the court's concerns, while allowing Durk to remain outside custody as he prepared for trial. And that point matters. A bond hearing is not a criminal trial. The question is not whether a defendant is guilty. It is whether release can occur under conditions the court considers sufficient while the case remains unresolved. Supporters gathered around the proceeding. Lawyers prepared their arguments. Millions of dollars and extensive safeguards were on the table. Then Andrea Robinson entered the courtroom. She had traveled from Savannah to Los Angeles, specifically for this moment. Nearly 3 years earlier, her son had died thousands of miles from home. Now she had crossed much of that same distance because she wanted the judge deciding Durk's custody status to hear directly from the family, living with the consequences of that night. Andrea was not there to compete with the defense on money. She could not offer a larger financial package. She brought something the paperwork could not measure: loss. When she addressed U.S. District Judge Michael Fitzgerald, the emotional atmosphere changed. According to the source material, Andrea became tearful while speaking about Xavier. and told the court she had never imagined losing her child. She also expressed fear for her own safety, making clear that, from her perspective, the emotional consequences and sense of danger had continued long after the shooting itself. That is what transformed her appearance from another procedural moment into the emotional center of the hearing. The defense could discuss monitoring, prosecutors could discuss risk, the judge could analyze legal standards. Andrea could tell the court what it meant to wake up every morning, knowing her only child was never coming home. And once she began speaking, everyone in that courtroom had to confront the human story sitting underneath the federal case. When the courtroom heard a mother, there are moments when the biggest name in a courtroom stops being the most important person in it. For Andrea Robinson, this was that moment. Through tears, she spoke about losing Xavier. According to the source material, she told the court that she never imagined she would lose her child and described the fear she continued to carry. She was not delivering a performance for social media. She was speaking directly to the judge, responsible for deciding whether Durk would remain detained while awaiting trial. For a few minutes, the language surrounding the case changed. It was no longer primarily about OTF, streaming numbers, rap rivalries, or celebrity. It was about absence. A son who did not come home. A mother who had traveled across the country because remaining silent felt impossible. Even Durk's defense publicly acknowledged the significance of her appearance. His attorney Drew Findling spoke respectfully about Andrea's statement afterward, describing her presentation in compassionate terms and emphasizing that she had acknowledged the limits of what she personally knew about the underlying events. That detail matters because Andrea's emotional power did not require her to prove the prosecution's case herself. She did not need to become an investigator or substitute her grief for evidence. The government would still have to establish its allegations through the legal process. Andrea's role was different. She made Xavier impossible to overlook. After the hearing, she appeared outside the courthouse, carrying a visible memorial to her son. The symbolism captured the entire conflict surrounding this story. Cameras were there because Lil Durk was famous. But Andrea wanted those cameras to remember why Xavier Robinson's name belonged in the conversation too. Her presence also demonstrated something social media could never provide. Online, people could ignore her post, attack her position, or scroll away. Inside federal court, the judge had to hear her statement. Attorneys on both sides had to sit in the room while she spoke. She had crossed the country to make sure grief could not be reduced to another comment underneath a viral video. Then the court made its decision. The multi-million-dollar bond proposal was denied. But that ruling did not mean what some people online immediately wanted it to mean. Bond denied does not mean guilty. Judge Michael Fitzgerald ultimately denied Lil Durk's bond request, leaving him in federal custody as the case moved forward. For Andrea Robinson, the ruling meant the defendant she associated with the case surrounding her son's death would not be released under the proposed conditions. But one distinction must remain absolutely clear. Denying bond is not the same thing as finding someone guilty. A detention decision addresses whether the court believes release is appropriate before trial. A criminal verdict answers an entirely different question after evidence has been tested through the judicial process. The source material describes the judge as considering the seriousness of the potential punishment and concerns surrounding flight risk when evaluating the proposal. The defense had offered substantial financial guarantees and strict monitoring conditions, but the court was not persuaded that the package sufficiently resolved those concerns. Durk therefore remained detained. Meanwhile, the legal fight continued to evolve. Prosecutors sought to introduce material connected to Durk's music as part of their theory concerning motive, while disputes also developed over additional allegations and how different counts would be handled. These battles matter because they determine what a jury may eventually hear and what prosecutors will actually be permitted to use in trying to prove their theory. For Andrea, however, every procedural development carried Xavier's name back into public discussion. That was both necessary and painful. Necessary because she refused to let him disappear beneath celebrity coverage. Painful because every new headline reopened the same reality her family had been carrying since August 2022. And the internet rarely processed that reality with the same caution demanded inside a courtroom. Online, people chose teams before evidence was tested. Some treated every prosecution victory as proof of guilt. Others treated every defense argument as proof the entire case was collapsing. Andrea's story exposes the problem with both reactions. There is room to respect due process and still acknowledge devastating loss. There is room to say allegations must be proven, while remembering that Xavier Robinson is dead, and once those two truths are held together, this stops looking like entertainment. When rap drama stops being entertainment, the internet has a way of turning tragedy into a scoreboard. A famous rapper gets arrested and reaction videos appear within minutes. Old songs resurface. Lyrics become clues. Fans divide into camps. Every filing becomes another round of arguments over who won, who lost, and whose version of history should dominate. Then the algorithm moves on. Families cannot. That is what makes Andrea Robinson's role in this story larger than one bond hearing. While millions could consume the case as content, she was living inside its consequences. Xavier was not a trending topic to her. He was her only child. Andrea repeatedly tried to pull the conversation away from celebrity and back toward humanity. Every time Xavier became reduced to Quando Rondo's cousin, she emphasized the person behind that description. Every time coverage centered exclusively on Lil Durk, she reminded people that another name belonged beside his in the history of this case. Xavier Robinson, a young man from Savannah who traveled to Los Angeles and never returned home. That does not decide whether Durk is legally responsible. Ayure, not social media, must evaluate the criminal allegations presented against him. The presumption of innocence matters precisely because emotionally powerful cases still require evidence, procedure and due process. But due process does not require forgetting victims. That balance is the deeper lesson emerging from Andrea's fight. Hip-hop audiences can discuss artists, cases, and cultural conflicts without turning real deaths into entertainment or treating grief as ammunition for fan wars. Accountability and fairness do not have to be enemies. Compassion for Xavier's family does not require prejudging a defendant. Just as respecting Durk's legal rights does not require pretending Andrea's loss is secondary. And that may be why the image of a mother carrying her son's memory into federal court is more powerful than any viral argument surrounding this case. Fame dominates headlines. Court documents dominate legal coverage. But when the cameras eventually disappear, families remain. Andrea Robinson understood that from the beginning. She could not change what happened on August 19. What she could do was make sure Xavier did not vanish beneath the names of people more famous than him. And as the legal process continues, one final question becomes bigger than Lil Durk. OTF, or any rap rivalry. What should an entire culture learn when entertainment collides with consequences this permanent? The lesson bigger than rap. When all the headlines, court filings, fan arguments, and viral clips are stripped away, this story leaves behind a lesson much bigger than Lil Durk, OTF, Quando Rondo, or any single rap rivalry. Fame can amplify conflict, but it cannot control where the consequences eventually land. And once real families are forced to live with those consequences, there is no stream count, reputation, loyalty code, or moment of retaliation powerful enough to reverse them. That is why Xavier Robinson cannot become a footnote. The criminal allegations against Lil Durk must still be judged through evidence and due process. An indictment is not a conviction. A denied bond is not a guilty verdict. And public emotion cannot replace what prosecutors must prove in court. That principle protects everyone. But respecting Durk's legal rights does not require ignoring Andrea Robinson's loss. Both realities can exist at the same time. A defendant deserves a fair process, and a grieving family deserves to have the human cost recognized. There is also a larger lesson for hip-hop itself. When conflict becomes part of entertainment, audiences can start consuming real consequences like episodes of a series. A diss becomes content, a response becomes content, an arrest becomes content. Eventually, even somebody's death risks becoming another statistic fans use to argue about which side won. But nobody wins when a mother has to carry her son's photograph into a courthouse. The strongest move is not allowing anger to determine what happens next. It is knowing when to stop a cycle before people who never started the conflict become trapped inside its consequences. Artists have influence, crews have influence, and fans have influence too. That influence can glorify escalation or it can make peace. Responsibility. And walking away looks stronger than retaliation. Andrea Robinson cannot rewrite August 19. 2022. What she has tried to control is what happens to Xavier's name afterward, through public statements, civil litigation, and her presence in federal court. She has insisted that her son be remembered as a person rather than simply another name attached to a celebrity case. Whatever the courts ultimately decide about the allegations against Durk, that part of her fight already carries a message worth hearing. No song, reputation, crew, rivalry, or moment of revenge is worth another family spending the rest of their lives carrying someone's photograph instead of holding that person again. Now I want to hear from you. If you believe hip-hop needs more voices, encouraging peace before conflicts create irreversible consequences. Come on, eh? If you believe the biggest responsibility begins with artists and the people immediately around them. Come on, dude. Keep the discussion respectful, and remember that real families exist behind these headlines. If this story gave you a different perspective, like the video, share it with someone who follows hip-hop, and subscribe to the channel for more stories where we go beyond the headlines and examine what is really at stake.